the difference between hearing and listening?
When you hear something, it's just words or sounds that goes through your ear, while
Mm-hmm.
listening is trying to comprehend or understand what are the words or sounds that you're hearing.
Okay. So hearing is just the sounds coming through, passing through, while listening is comprehension. Okay, very good. That's a good point also. How about Alvin? Yan.
Hearing is a part of five senses, while listening is a choice to hear and analyze what you hear.
Okay, so that's also a different interpretation. Oh my gosh, I'm foggy brain. But yeah, that's a different interpretation. That's also a very easy interpretation to understand. And you are all correct. You're all correct with when trying to determine what the difference is between hearing and listening. So here is here are our comparisons between the two. And this allows us a better understanding on what we should be practicing at work. So when you say hearing versus listening, when we say hearing, it's more of passive. In other words, it's just going through our ears, but we're not really absorbing it. Versus listening is when you actually try to understand and try to absorb it. A perfect example would probably be when you're talking to your spouse or your mom, and your mom is simply saying something, and it's if she's nagging, it happens when your mom is simply nagging or saying a lot of other stuff that you don't want to hear, you quite zone out. No, parang it's coming in, but you're not really absorbing it, and then it's just coming out the other ear. So that's what you call hearing. You're passively just hearing all these things. But when you listen is when you actually absorb and try to remember what your mom was trying to say. And so goes with our clients. With our clients, it's really important to be listening because you know that your job and the tasks at hand are very important, and you have to know what their instructions are for you to be able to execute the tasks at hand. Next, hearing is just perceiving a sound through the ear. Okay, while listening is making an effort to perceive the sound. Jack, has it ever happened where you actually try to, listen to something more closely to understand? Has it ever happened?
Yeah, before when I talked to one of our onshore partners in Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because of his accent.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes, diba, when we try to talk to somebody, they keep talking. But if you want to listen to them, you actually probably make notes, write down notes, or try to put your headphones to come closer or to hear it more clearly. Or we ask people around us to hush, so that we are able to understand more effectively. Okay, so that's listening. While another definition, hearing does not require conscious effort, and this was mentioned a while ago, while listening requires conscious effort. What are ways where you guys show that you are putting effort into listening? What are ways where you actually demonstrate that you're putting conscious effort in listening? What are obvious ways?
Mhm.
Yes, Mara.
Making an eye contact.
Making eye contact, yes. Thank you. How about Jet? I saw Jet raising his hand.
Uh, Giving our undivided attention.
Giving your undivided attention. That's correct. About the others? Other conscious ways to show that we are actively listening.
Nodding,
Nodding. That's correct. Very good. What else?
using your phone,
Not using your phone is an obvious reason. Another way also. What else? There's a few more, but
jot
probably
down
you're there. Yes, jotting down notes. That's correct. Now, jotting down notes and asking follow-up questions. Diba? Follow-up questions. Because when we're actively listening, aside from just the verbal confirmation of or nodding your head, we also ask questions to clarify. And those are ways for us to, those are indicative ways saying that we are actively listening. Okay, very good. And lastly, hearing is involuntary. This is things such as, okay, these are things that just come out and pass through, while listening is voluntary, where we make, as mentioned earlier, conscious effort to take note of the information being said. Okay, so we expect everyone in this class, especially for the employees of ResMac, to be actively listening and to make it a conscious effort to listen to these details and listen to information very well for us to be able to actively and effectively use or do our job in for ResMac. Okay, but there are some barriers for effective listening. There are times where things happen and it prevents us from listening. Okay, things happen and it prevents us from listening. Number one is knowing the answer. It happens. We don't listen anymore when we already know the answer. Do you guys agree? Yeah. What is a perfect example here? Like in your everyday lives, in your job, you don't listen anymore when you know the answer. Has this ever happened to you guys? I'm sure it has. You didn't reply, you didn't parang you zoned out already. You did not try to put up an effort listening anymore because you already know what's happening. And it happens. Okay. A case in point is, this is my perfect this is what, sorry, I'll share with you one scenario. I attend classes online also for Ateneo. It's for traditional Chinese medicine. And always on the first part of the modules of class is the introduction or the basics to traditional Chinese medicine. And sometimes I don't listen to the introduction anymore because it has always been the same introduction. However, a barrier for me to effectively listen is because I already know what's being discussed, I don't pay attention anymore. But the disadvantage to that is, of course, every class is a different class. And every discussion has a different information coming in. And sometimes because I don't actively listen anymore, I miss out on additional information I could have learned. Why? Because I already know the answer. Oh, na-discuss na yan. Alam ko na yan. Okay? And we should not be like that. When we already, even if we know the answer already, there might be a thin chance that we might miss out on information. And it's very important for us to still take time to understand and listen. Okay? Next. Ruth, can you read for me, please?
Trying to be helpful.
Okay. So common barrier to effective listening is trying to be helpful. When you try to be helpful, but instead you offer a solution that you're implying, because you're trying to be helpful, you try to give a solution without checking what the speaker is trying to say first. No, you mean well. You meant well to help, but without having to understand first where the speaker is coming from. So that becomes also a barrier. Okay. And in cases like this, sometimes it becomes more of a problem than finding the solution, because we kind of impose, or sometimes we kind of impose things that is not part of the whole picture. Okay. And next is, sure. Would you mind reading, please?
It's treating discussion as a competition.
What do you think does this mean?
It means like you're insisting something in your, and then you tend to not listen anymore to what you're saying.
That is correct. Now, treating discussion as a competition, it's like you're being argumentative or feeling compelled to change the idea of the person you're talking to. In other words, in Tagalog, hindi, ito yung mas magandang point. You don't want to understand anymore what Jack is saying. You don't want to understand anymore what Main is saying because you want them to get your point. And it's become a competition. So what normally happens there is because sometimes you're so passionate about the information that you have that you don't want other people anymore to have anything to say about it and just make them see your point. Okay, and that happens. So what do you think is the best way to go about it? How do we solve this barrier? How do we overcome this barrier? How do we overcome this barrier of no, mas maganda yung point ko, or my point is better, or listen to this first? How do we overcome that problem?
For me, you just have to listen first and be objective, be open-minded. If he has a good point, then you can maybe consider.
That's correct.
Talk about it.
That is correct. That is true. There can be what we call, you can agree to disagree. But you don't have to have the same opinion about things. But you always have to make sure to agree to disagree. Hindi nila kailangan makuha yung point mo. Kailangan lang maintindihan nila yung point mo. Okay? Next. Kate, would you mind reading, please?
Trying to influence or impress.
What does this mean? What do you think?
I think it's a common barrier. If you just want the full attention of everyone and you don't listen to what they're saying, or you're not being considerate already.
Yes, that happens. When you're too conscious about if you're too conscious about how they will perceive you, sometimes you're too drawn into to give them a very good perception of you. Sometimes you don't listen anymore to things and you're outside your bubble. Okay. How about reacting to red flag words? What does this mean? This is also a barrier. What does reacting to red flag words mean? Sometimes we have triggers. There are words that trigger us, meaning that these are words that trigger emotions in us. And when people say it, sometimes we get distracted. We don't pay attention anymore. Has this ever happened to you? Mara, has it ever happened to you? There's one word that was said during a conversation and hindi ka na naka-move on. You were not able to get yourself out of that emotion and, hindi ka na nakinig sa kanya because of that one word or instance that he mentioned. Few more things. There are some people who believe that everyone's language is the same. What do you think is the barrier? What do you think does this barrier mean? What do you think does this mean? That everyone speaks the same language. Anyone? How do you interpret this? This is a common barrier. Oh, we all speak the same language. So we're all on the same page. Oh, ayan, it's a phrase. Oh, we're all on the same page. Gets namin lahat yan. Makukuha niya rin yan. Alam niya na yan. Alvin, you want to try?
Believing that everyone language is the same means it becomes a barriers when we believe that we are on the same page, yeah, like what you said, and we didn't listen to someone's opinion
Mm-hmm.
or suggestion or something like that.
That is correct. It's believing that you all understand each other and that there's no need to pay attention or pay extra attention. For example, Sarah and Ruth, they do different things for SMA. If Ruth believed that Sarah knows already, what she normally will do is not listen anymore. Or parang sabihin niya, hindi, alam na ni Ruth yan. I don't need to listen anymore. We are all on the same page. We all speak the same language. There is no need to understand anymore what Sarah is saying. But that is a misconception. Because each one of us can be given one sentence, but we can have different ways of interpreting that sentence. That goes also the same thing. That also happens the same thing with effective listening. When we say I love you can mean differently for different people. And sometimes we all think that it's the same thing and we just don't pay attention anymore. Okay. So that's also a common barrier. And may I ask, Jack, would you mind reading the next piece?
Mixing up the forest and the trees.
What does this mean? What do you think? Why is this a barrier? Why do you think is this a barrier? Mixing up the forest and the trees. Eh, pareho namang puno nandyan eh. Why? But it's actually different. There's a difference between the forest and the trees.
Yeah, I'm not sure about not everyone has the same perspective.
That is true. That is correct. Perfect. It's a mismatch. Even if we say a forest and a tree and it's all the same context, it can be a barrier, and with the assumption that everyone knows everything and they are understanding the same things. Okay, it's a misconception. Please do not assume that people will understand the things that we say altogether. When we effectively listen, we can, as mentioned, just like this one, believing that everyone's language is the same. When we mix up the forest and the trees, it is a misconception because we need to make sure that we pay close attention to the information all the time for us to be able to effectively listen. Okay? And please encourage the speaker to supply missing context because sometimes if we are not sure if we have everything correct, we have to ask questions. That's why that's part of actively listening. We do not assume things. So do not mix the forest and the trees. It's always best to ask questions. That will show that we are also actively listening. And last, Maine, would you mind reading the last piece?
Oversplitting or overlapping.
What does that mean?
Oversplitting or overlapping. Okay.
I'll help you. What is split? When we say split,
I think it's like severe something. Split.
ano split sa Tagalog?
Nahati.
Nahati. Okay. Nahati. That is correct. How about lumping? Pinagsasama-sama. Okay. So oversplitting or overlumping, a common barrier is when there are sentences or context or messages na masyadong kinagahati-hati. Masyado nating kina-categorize, in-over-analyze natin. That sometimes the information does not come out right anymore. In other words, we overthink. We overanalyze things. And that also becomes a barrier for effective listening. All we have to do is take the sentence or information into context and take it as it is. But sometimes kasi our tendency is we overanalyze things, we overreact. We want to split information and we think it will be more helpful, and that becomes a barrier also. And what happens is we don't get the message, we don't absorb the message right away or the right way. So what we can do is just take into context the information, hear it sometimes we all have to do is just keep repeating it for us to be able to understand. No need for us to parang overanalyze. And that will help us in our role as employees of Red.